Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park, and today we bring you our first read of The Membranes by Chita Wei. In this book, we are looking at a post-apocalyptic society that's based around 2060 or 2090, just somewhere off in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1995, it was a much more distant future. As we look at it today in 2025, it seems ever closer and ever more real to the consequences that we're seeing this world draw out for us, like the loss of the ozone layer, the fact that the entire world has to be moved off of the surface because it's no longer inhabitable.
Right.
So there are people living under seas. Wars are still present and just fought in a different way. But all of that to say is we've seen several books, many books now come out where it shows a dystopian or a post-apocalyptic society.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that our futures are going to change, I mean, everything changes, it seems more grim to look further into the years that are going to be ahead. Would you, as Jamae, choose to live in the past, the present, or the future? And this doesn't have to be in the United States of America. It could be wherever you might choose to live.
For sure. I think I would still want to live in the present because even though there is the leakage of the ozone layer, there's still time to steer the boat away.
So you would want to try to work on our current effect of the ozone layer.
Right. I would want to continue working with whatever organizations are making that happen.
But you wouldn't want to go like, let's see, I think cars were starting to come up in the 1960s or 70s.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to kind of go back in time then and try to help prevent. I mean, cars aren't the only emission source, but around that time, I feel like is when we've really started killing off the environment. Like, you wouldn't want to go and start fixing things then.
I mean, I would want to fix things then, but considering the political climate for Asian and Asian American folks, I don't think I would have had as much sway in anything.
Hmm. I think that's a big part of going back into the past. Like, I wouldn't want to go into the future.
Right.
The future sounds scary and very unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if there was a time machine and we go 50 years into the future, there may not be an existence on
Right.
the actual Earth.
Right.
Like recently, I think I saw something saying that there's an asteroid planning to hit some part of the Earth in 2032.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing what that actually means. It could be Armageddon, like the movie, or it could just be a rock that ends up hitting. But knowing the future is so scary. The past sounds enticing, but like you said, yeah, like Asians aren't very well historically respected within the world climate.
Mm-hmm.
But there are areas where you could be Asian and be very happy, just depending on how wealthy you are. I think wealth was also a huge determinant of how happy, I guess, you are in the present or the past.
For sure. But I don't think I would change my family. And so by not changing my family, I don't think that would change my socioeconomic background.
But you wouldn't want to go to the Philippines in the past? I guess that was
No.
the era of the. I can't remember the ruler's name. I just remember his wife with the shoes.
Ferdinand Marcos.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Marcos son is currently the president, but martial law was in effect at that time. So, no, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah. And that is to say, it seems like a lot of our past history is kind of revamping itself. Like we have people on stages doing Nazi salutes, and
Yeah.
we have rulers of past awful rulers coming back to, I don't know, somehow end up leading countries in some ways.
Right.
I don't know. For me, I think it would be going back into the past. I don't think it'd be very far in the past, or it would be very far in the past.
Hmm.
Like when Korea was within its like monarchy societies and they were wearing all those funky clothes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to know a life that wasn't toilets, because that would be a big no for me. Like I would have to go so far in the past that it's like, yep, toilets don't exist. And then just know that fact from birth, or else I wouldn't want to go in the past.
That's fair.
But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think as much destruction and bad things are happening, there are a lot of good people out there trying their best to save the world and do the right thing.
Hmm.
It just seems like the people with money are trying to do the other part, like the evil villain part of this whole thing.
I mean, they are the evil villain. They are the antagonist in this story.
Well, one thing we can say is there's no way to stop the future from happening. So
Right.
we're all going to move into that direction together. But if you need something that's maybe a little bit more soothing and something to break out of the drum despair of what we have to face on a daily basis, you might want to look into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Rachel Wong. Rachel Wong is a Chinese American pop R&B artist based in Tualatin, Oregon. Her heartfelt lyrics and mesmerizing sound paint an emotional journey through storytelling of love, self-discovery, and empowerment. You can learn more about Rachel Wong on YouTube at Rachel Wong Music and on Instagram at Ray Can Sing. That's RAE Can Sing.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so first read of The Membranes by Chita Wei. We have read pages 1 through 60, which were chapters 1 through chapter 5. We are learning what is going on, and we're focusing what's going on around the character of Momo.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to set up what this world looks like, we kind of talked about it briefly within the first part of this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a world that's kind of been depleted and is much more bleak on the surface of it because a large part of the ozone has stripped away, causing a radioactive, unlivable surface for most people on the dry parts of the planet.
Right. Not to say that there aren't any people on the surface of the planet, but anyone who can afford to has moved underwater.
Yeah, and there are things going on the surface. It's just for humans and the general population of humans, there's a high rate of skin cancer because of the loss of ozone. So most people are trying to run away from that and get underwater.
Mm-hmm.
The things that do seem to still exist above the surface are mining and resources.
Hmm.
They've also talked about the use of cyborgs, which is a half human, half machine kind of structure that does a lot of the more physical daily tasks that can be done by a machine.
Right.
And the other part of it is the wars that are fought on this earth are no longer the soldiers against soldiers kind of mentality where
Mm-hmm.
it's just these massive armies going against each other. There are these designated war areas on the surface where it seems almost like a gladiator ring, and the fate of the outcome is determined by what happens within that ring.
Yes, it's like a land grab, but just between two warriors.
Yeah. There is a part also mentioned about how because of the benefits of melanin, like black skin is superior in this
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was such a twist from what we have now and
Right.
shows the dissonance of maybe where we can ideally evolve into, where we're not just looking at fair skin as the primary superiority kind of
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's a change in dynamic as well as a change in conversation.
Right. But like you said, most people, if you had the means and resources, ended up going underground. And what that underground looks like are these bubbles, and there are different sections of bubbles depending on where in the world you are. So it's just off of most coasts, I think.
Yes.
But it's these bubbles where the cities are within those bubbles, and they've built an underground society.
And by underground, it's underwater, not under the land masses.
Right. An underwater society.
Yes.
An example they kind of used was trying to save people off of the surface like Noah's Ark,
Yes.
which was like an ironic twist on how water destroyed versus water saved in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a little interesting.
Yes, and it's also interesting to think about what the temperatures are like because it's underwater, but it's still water that's being boiled by the sun.
Right. And that can lead to different things like skin issues, which ends up being a big part of this world.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like skincare becomes magnified in terms of importance
Yes.
because of what the sun has done. And I'm assuming also with what skin cancer has devastated in this world, like
Hmm.
skin is probably a resource that is highly valued at this point.
Right, exactly.
So that brings in our main character, Momo.
Yes, Momo, a person, not Momo, our cat.
Yeah,
Momo is a dermal care technician. Essentially, she's an esthetician for those who are underwater.
right. But not what estheticians are now.
Mm-hmm.
She is very valued because dermal care technicians go through this massive training and they are kind of the cream of the crop of people that you would look for in terms of societal standings.
Exactly. And with Momo in particular, she has this technology where she coats all of her clients in a second skin that protects their natural skin.
Yep, it's called M Skin, and we'll talk about that more later as we kind of go into a further discussion of everything that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
As we go through our read, we also find out a little bit about her personality,
Mm-hmm.
one in which she is kind of aloof in a lot of her relationships.
Right. In her present day, she lives alone except with a puppy named Andy.
Yep.
Otherwise, though, she doesn't really socialize. She doesn't talk to anybody except for her clients. And she somehow has like this own bubble home of her own.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons is because she doesn't want to live with her mother.
Mm.
She has a strained relationship with her mom, who her mom in herself is a very wealthy and respected kind of business person within this world.
Hmm.
But we haven't fully found a relationship and the reasons why Momo wants to separate. Besides, what we've been told is that Momo wants to make a name for herself. She doesn't want to piggyback on the name of her mother.
Right. And I think there's also the thing about her past where, as a child, Momo was estranged from her mom. She was in a hospital room for 3 years. And I think that could also be a part of why there is this strain in the relationship.
Yep. And it's not to say the mother was a bad mother. She just didn't have resources. So she did have to leave Momo in the hospital and do, I think, 2 or 3 jobs, is what the book said, just to support that. But while Momo was in the hospital, she did go through a variety of different relationships.
Mm-hmm. And she also went through a variety of tests through those relationships.
Right. I think this was actually before she even ended up in the hospital. We find out a little bit of Momo's relationships with other people, and that is through the person Lola.
Mm-hmm.
Lola is a childhood person that Momo found herself attracted to, and it seems like one of those attractions where you don't know what the word attraction means.
Right. You're not sure what these hormones are. You're not sure what this pull towards this person is.
Right. So all Momo knows is that she has this feeling. Then, when Lola reciprocates and wants to act on those feelings, Momo pulls back and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to pursue that.
Right.
There's no context as to why quite yet. All we know is that that's what Momo did.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, we get that second relationship, or at least second close relationship, when she is in the hospital setting, and that's going to be with Andy.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like Andy was put there for a purpose, like not just to be friends with Momo, but to quell Momo's anger.
Right. I do want to go into more depth with Andy's relationship with Momo, but what we know is that they became very close friends, and then something happened, and that cut off the relationship for Momo, which may have kind of designated how she acts upon relationships now.
Hmm.
And speaking of now, the other relationship that we see through Momo's life is Tomi Ito.
Mm-hmm. And this is in her adulthood.
Yep, right now, at least through the context of the story, Momo is going to be turning 30.
Mm-hmm.
She is a very esteemed dermal care technician, and Tomi Ito is one of her esteemed clients. Tomi has provided her with a lot of money through services, it seems
Mm-hmm.
like. Tomi's also given Momo opportunities to be publicized because Tomi is a journalist who wants to put the story of Momo out there.
Right.
And where we kind of leave off earlier in the read is that Tomi is connecting the story of Momo and her mom, which is maybe rekindling that relationship that who knows if Momo's really ready for.
Right. And in terms of other things that Tomi's done for Momo, she's given her the dog.
Right. Which is a very prized possession to have a real actual dog rather than like
Mm-hmm.
a dog cyborg.
Right.
So let's go into that relationship of Andy and Momo.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two Andys. There's Andy the dog, and then there's Andy, the character that we saw while Momo was hospitalized.
And is the namesake for the dog.
I think the dog was named Andy prior to meeting Momo. Like Momo took the dog because it was named Andy, or at least one of the reasons she took the dog was because it was named Andy.
Hmm.
She thought it was like Kismet.
No, true, true, true.
So Andy, the I'm gonna say humanoid because we don't really know enough about the character that was in the hospital with Momo.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, the humanoid, was pretty mysterious in this read.
I think the clues make it so that we know that beyond being a humanoid, I think the clues show that Andy was a cyborg.
I think so too, especially because Momo takes a bite out of Andy's finger
Mm-hmm.
and pretty much dislocates it, but there's no blood. The finger just comes off and they're able to replace it.
And Andy doesn't really blink or even make any reflex.
Right. And like you were mentioning, I do think that Andy was put there for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the purpose was?
I think the purpose was essentially to give Momo a playmate and to have her look toward something in the future.
Interesting. There's a quote that Andy says, which is right before Momo goes into the big surgery that changes her life. The quote is that you are a canary in a cage. Later, the author describes that canaries were used as a bait or a tool by soldiers to find out if places were poisoned or not, and the
Mm-hmm.
canaries would die within their cages.
Right.
What I think is that Andy wasn't just a cyborg as a playmate. Andy was put there so that Momo could be put into Andy's body.
Mm,
I
I
th-
can see that.
yeah, I think now what we're seeing is Momo in Andy's body because Momo was in a condition that was so bad that she was hospitalized. She was not likely to make it out of there, which is why
Mm-hmm.
she was in such special conditions. Knowing that weird scene where right before she went into surgery, they were like touching heads, and that was the last thing that Andy said was, "You are a canary in a cage."
Mm-hmm.
I think this is Momo being trapped in the cage of this body,
Mm.
but I'm unsure why it's a cage or why Momo is a canary.
Gotcha. I was thinking something different about why she was in this hospital setting for so long and what her surgery was for. Because in my mind, I think that the tests that they were doing to Momo were not necessary. I think they were trying to find something out about her body. And I think that when her mom was calling Momo at one point and saying, "You're gonna be like Andy one day," I thought that she was saying that we are acknowledging that Momo is a trans child and she's going to be changed either into a cyborg or to something else because she's something special to them.
Mm. I would say they don't talk a lot about the trans community within this book, but they do talk about the queer community or
Mm-hmm.
like the liking of whoever you like and how
Right.
that no longer matters.
Right.
So it is a book where they've created a society where, like, honestly, as I was reading, that was the last thing on my mind. When Lola and Momo had that scene, I was like, okay, they just like each other
Mm-hmm.
because of the way they wrote it. It just doesn't seem like an issue of whether she's queer or not.
Mm-hmm.
The trans part, they haven't really mentioned anything about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if that does play a role within all of this.
For sure.
Based off of what I'm thinking, I do think it's much more of the cyborg human
Hmm.
kind of switch off, whether that's a much bigger thing that we see. One thing that we haven't mentioned is that Momo does have a surgery when she's in her adulthood, like maybe 27 or 28 years old,
Mm-hmm.
where she does have her finger replaced.
Right.
But it does seem like a human surgery more so than a cyborg type of surgery.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like an advanced human thing that they've done.
For sure. Either way, whatever the surgery was that she had as a child doesn't seem like there was any consent involved.
Yeah, I mean, she was also like 5 or 6 or something at the
She was
time.
8.
She was 8. So, I mean, a lot of times the things that are done to you when you're 8, you don't really have a lot of say in it just because your brain's not developed enough to know what's going on.
But there's also telling the child what's happening rather than just hiding it and making them feel like, oh, this has to be done, whatever it is.
But the hiding may also be a protective mechanism so the
Hmm,
child doesn't get scared.
fair.
So, I mean, I know a lot of times when I would go into the hospitals, my parents wouldn't really tell me the reason. I would just get a shot or whatever it was going to happen because it was going to happen. Even when I had to get stitches, they didn't really tell me what stitches were because it would have probably freaked me out more than knowing that I was going to get needles like put into my like chin is where I had it and like being stabbed, especially when I'm already like traumatized by something else. So I do think that's a natural parental instinct is to maybe protect the child in that way. Not all parents, obviously, but
Right. I was gonna say my mom was very honest with me when I was getting anything done.
mm, so yeah, I mean, who knows the reason, but that's also why we read ahead in this book.
Hmm.
So before we talk about what we're reading next, what are your first impressions on the story that we've read?
I think that it is a very eccentric story. It's more than just an apocalyptic look into the future, but more a conversation about human or humanoid relationships and how that works in the future as well.
Yeah, the book is written pretty simply, and I
Hmm.
don't think it's naturally that way. I do think the translation has something to do with it.
Yeah.
I also think it's because it was written in 1995, whereas books that we see nowadays are like 400, 300 pages on a pretty consistent basis.
Hmm.
But the descriptors kind of leave room for the imagination. It lets your mind roam and create stories. And I really like that piece of it. I
Yes.
like how simple it is to intake, but my brain can create a further imagination of what might be going on,
Right.
which is likely why we have two different thoughts on what might be happening with the
Hmm.
rest of this book.
Definitely.
For us to find out more, we're going to have to do more reading, and that's going to be our second read, which is,
Pages 61 through 114 on the physical copy, but for everyone, that's chapters 6 through 9.
yep. And this book, particularly, was a recommendation from one of our listeners.
Yes, and we appreciate them highly recommending this book, which is why we put it in the mix.
Yeah. And if you also want to recommend a book for us to read, you can do so by emailing us at.
AsianBookClubPod@gmail.com or reaching out to us through Instagram at Asian Book Club Pod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, where we have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat! Bye!